Hey, what is going on, guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at a few underplayed or sleeper OP champions for patch 6.23. So these champions, they're not really played very often, but they're pretty good right now in this meta for a few different reasons. So with that being said, guys, let's get into the video. So the first champion on this list here is going to be Nautilus support. So the main reason to why I think Nautilus is pretty strong right now is because Vayne does have around a 35% pick rate this patch, and I think that Nautilus does a really good job against Vayne for a few reasons. So the first reason is because of his ultimate. A lot of the other support champions, they don't have that point and click ability that they can use to lock down someone like Vayne in a team fight, but with Nautilus's ultimate, as long as he saves that for Vayne in every single fight and just uses it on her when she tries to go in, it's going to zone her really nicely. And then after his ultimate does hit the Vayne, he can follow that up with a very easy Q and just chain CC her to death. When I was playing Vayne, or I was actually playing Nautilus, and the enemy team had a Vayne, she was completely useless once it did reach the mid to late game. If she tried to come close in a team fight to deal damage, you just throw your ultimate on her and she really can't do anything throughout the fight. Even if she does buy a QSS, she is still going to be crowd controlled by the Nautilus because he's got 4 different ways of like CCing the Vayne. He's got his ultimate, his Q, his passive, and then his E as well. So I feel like right now, if the enemy team does play Vayne, then I would look to pick Nautilus support for sure. He is also really strong right now due to Courage of the Colossus. He's also a great pick in the top lane. He actually does have a pretty low pick rate for top as well, so either for top lane or support, I would recommend picking up Nautilus this patch. The next champion on this list is going to be Ziggs. So right now, I was actually really surprised when I was doing research for this video. Ziggs actually has a winning record against every single mid lane champion right now besides Vel'Koz. He's got a winning win rate against like even the assassins right now, and there's a few reasons to why I think he is doing pretty well this patch. So the main reason is because he's one of the best tower pushing mid lane champions in the game, and against those assassins, it's going to be very easy for him to push them in during the laning phase. So if the enemy team does have someone like a Katarina or a Talon or a Zed, he can easily shove the wave, shove into their tower and get auto attacks off on that tower. His passive damage on towers is quite a bit, and then once he does get the tower pretty low, he can use his W to execute it. So I think because Ziggs does have a lot of favorable matchups right now in the laning phase, he can easily get that first blood tower and just snowball out of control. He also is one of the best teamfight mid lane champions. His ultimate provides so much damage in a team fight. His Q, his E, and his W are also all AoE abilities, so the amount of damage output, or the amount of potential damage output you have with Ziggs is really good. And he's also a mid lane champion that hasn't been nerfed in such a long time. The last time Ziggs got changed, I'm pretty sure it was a buff, and it was a buff to his W to where he can now like execute the towers. I'm pretty sure his Q also got like a mana decrease a while ago, so he really hasn't, he's like one of the only mid lane champions that has not been nerfed in the past. Next patch especially, I think he could get even stronger because in 6.24, we're seeing some nerfs to Syndra coming in, and we're also seeing nerfs to Rylai's. Ziggs is not a mid lane champion that usually goes for that Rylai, so I think that other champions like Orianna, Victor, Syndra, any one of those champions or any champion that does build Rylai's right now, they could get quite a bit weaker, which could make Ziggs quite a bit stronger in 6.24. So overall, the main things that you want to remember when playing Ziggs is to try to constantly harass in the laning phase, try to shove the enemy into their tower, especially if they are a melee champion. Always be trying to get those auto attacks off on the enemy tower, especially if your passive is up. And then once the tower does reach, I think it's around like 800 HP, you can execute it with your W for that 650 first blood tower gold. Next up on the list is going to be Ramus top lane. So this could also go for Ramus in the jungle, but I think that Ramus top lane is actually really underrated right now, and it's pretty strong. So right now, the top lane meta, we're seeing a lot of Riven being played, a lot of Yasuo, Nasus, Darius, and in the jungle, we're seeing a lot of Kha'Zix, Rengar, Vi. Ramus can do really well against pretty much any one of those champions because of his taunt ability. If a Yasuo tries to dive in during a team fight, if he doesn't have QSS, he's gonna get blown up right away because of that Ramus taunt. If Riven tries to dive in, Ramus just taunts her. So he's a really good champion, or he's a really good pick against those champions that want to try to dive in on your AD carry, which is why I do think he's a pretty good pick right now in this meta. Now in the top lane, if you are going up against Yasuo or Riven, then you can just rush armor. You can pretty much build full armor on Ramus. You can still deal a lot of damage due to your passive, and the enemy top laner, they just won't be able to kill you. I'm pretty sure Ramus right now, he's got a 62% win rate against Yasuo, which is really insane. So if the enemy team does have like a Yasuo mid or top lane, then I would look to pick Ramus for sure. He is also a great pick with the new mastery, Courage of the Colossus, because it's just really easy for Ramus to proc that. He's got the point and click taunt, so he is going to get that shield in every single team fight as long as he does get that taunt off, or I'm pretty sure his Q does proc it as well, so it's just very easy for him to get that massive shield. Now, if you are thinking about playing him in the top lane, I would use him more like as a counter pick instead of blind picking him. He does have some weaker matchups in the top lane. If he is going up against a ranged top lane champion, then it is going to be pretty hard for him to do a lot in the laning phase because he doesn't have a ranged ability and he doesn't really have any way of like getting onto a ranged champion. So try to avoid ranged champions, but definitely look to pick him against a Yasuo, a Riven, or a Nasus. He can do really well in those matchups. Next up in the jungle is going to be Skarner. So I feel like Skarner is just such an underrated champion, even though he's really strong right now in this meta. And with the new jungle, Skarner clears out the jungle one of the fastest for any jungler because he's got the AoE damage from his Q and his E as well. So it just allows him to clear those raptors and those Krugs out really effectively. He also does have great synergy with Courage of the Colossus. So his E can proc that with the stun, and then his ultimate can also proc it, and along with the shield from his W, he's going to be very hard to kill in a mid to late game team fight. You're going to be getting a lot of shielding with Skarner, and it's just going to make him super tanky. And he's also very similar to Ramus in the sense that he does have that ability which he can use to peel off the enemy dive champions. His ultimate does a really good job because number one, it's a point and click ability, and number two, it's a suppress that lasts a pretty long duration. So if you've got a Kha'Zix or a Rengar diving in, you just press R on them and your team should be able to burst them down before they even get out of your ultimate. And also, because we are seeing quite a few immobile AD carries being played right now, we're seeing a lot of Twitch, a lot of Jhin, a lot of Jinx. Vayne's also being played quite a bit right now. She does have the gap close with her Q, but she still is a pretty easy target in a team fight for someone like a Vi or a Hecarim. So if the enemy team does have like a heavy dive comp, I would definitely look to pick Skarner in that situation. And then the last champion to round out this list for this patch is going to be Swain. So right now, Swain does a really good job in the top lane in my opinion because we are seeing quite a few tanks also being played right now in this meta. Courage of the Colossus has kind of brought back some tank champions in the top lane. We're seeing a lot of Maokai right now, Poppy as well. Those are two of the most played like tankier top lane champions. Swain can do really well in those matchups and against those tank champions because in a team fight, you're not going to be able to kill Swain unless you do have burst damage. Sustained damage is not going to kill him, and because if the enemy team has someone like a Nautilus support, if they got a Maokai top lane, and they also have like a tankier jungler, say someone like a Hecarim, that Swain is not going to die in a team fight. He's going to be able to sustain really easily with his ultimate. Once he gets a Spirit Visage, he's pretty much going to be unkillable. So overall, I would look to pick Swain against a tank tankier enemy team comp or against a tanky enemy top lane champion, he is also great in most melee matchups in the top lane. A few champions I would try to avoid are Yasuo and Riven though. The main reasons to why Yasuo and Riven do pretty well against Swain are because they do have gap close abilities, which makes it very easy for them to dodge Swain's W and Q. So if Swain does plant down his W, Yasuo can just E through that, and Riven can just use her E to get away from it. And if he does plant down his Q, then Yasuo can just dash like through his Q. Riven can also use her Q and her E to get out of it. So he isn't going to be able to get off consistent damage against those two champions. So that is going to be all for this video, guys. Be sure to let me know down in the comments below of some champions that are kind of underplayed right now that you guys are playing in this patch. So with that being said, guys, thanks for watching. Hope you all have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.